The nightclubs were always alive, pulsating with the kind of energy that only music, money, and notoriety could summon. Diddy's parties were legendary, each one bigger and bolder than the last, carrying an air of mystique that lured celebrities, moguls, and socialites like moths to a flame. At the heart of these gatherings was chaos dressed in designer clothes and masked by extravagance. But beneath the glamour and the champagne-fueled revelry, there was something darker, something only a few people ever truly witnessed. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. Among those few was Marcus Steele, a 6'4" fortress of a man, tasked with overseeing security for Diddy's events. Marcus had been in the game for years, working with high-profile clients in the entertainment industry, but nothing had prepared him for what he encountered when he became the head of security for Diddy's 2020 party circuit. It wasn't just parties, Marcus would later recall, his voice carrying the weight of too many long nights. It was something else. Something you couldn't quite put your finger on until you were standing in the middle of it. The year 2020 was a surreal chapter in history. While much of the world was locked down and the global pandemic forced people to retreat into their homes, the world of the ultra-rich found loopholes to keep the good times rolling. Diddy's parties became infamous for pushing the boundaries, not only of luxury but also of morality. Marcus's nightmares were born not from the glitz and glamour, but from the shadows lurking behind the velvet ropes. He spoke of the arrival moments, the nerve-wracking hours before the first guest even walked through the door. Planning security for these events wasn't just about keeping the wrong people out. It was about keeping the right people in check. There were the A-listers who brought their entourages that came with entourages of their own. There were the dealers, the clout chasers, the influencers desperate to be seen in the right selfie at the right time. And then, of course, there were the organizers who demanded Marcus and his team disappear into the background while keeping everything and everyone under control. The weirdest part, Marcus admitted, was how ordinary some of it seemed at first glance. You'd see people laughing, dancing, drinking, but then you'd look closer, and that's when it hit you. It wasn't about the fun anymore, it was about survival of the most extreme. He spoke of one night in particular, a mansion party that took place in the hills outside Los Angeles. The guest list was allegedly capped at 150, but by midnight, there were easily 400 people packed into the sprawling estate. It was a spectacle. Women in barely their couture lounging by the infinity pool, VIPs sequestered in private cabanas, security teams stationed at every entrance and exit. And somewhere in the middle of it all was Marcus, watching the crowd with a sharp eye and an uneasy feeling in his gut. It was like watching a storm roll in, he said. You could feel it building, but you couldn't stop it. He remembered a fight breaking out near the pool. Two men arguing over a woman who seemed more amused than concerned. Marcus and his team broke it up quickly, but the tension lingered, buzzing like static electricity in the air. Later that night, he found one of those men unconscious in a guest bathroom, his face pale, his pulse barely detectable. Marcus called for an ambulance, but the party didn't stop. The music kept pounding, the drinks kept flowing, and when the EMTs arrived, they were waved in through the back entrance so as not to disturb the vibe. And that was just one of many incidents. Marcus described another night when a well-known actor passed out in the middle of the dance floor, his body limp, his friends too intoxicated to do anything but laugh. Marcus had to carry the man out himself, cradling the actor's head like a child's as cameras flashed all around them. The image never made it to the tabloids, Marcus made sure of that, but it haunted him nonetheless. Then there were the drugs. Marcus wasn't naive. He knew drugs were a staple of Hollywood's party scene. But the scale of it at Diddy's events was staggering. He recounted seeing tables lined with powders and pills, their presence so blatant, it was as if the partygoers had forgotten there was anything illicit about it. Guests stumbled through the night in a haze, their inhibitions stripped away, their secrets laid bare. Marcus often wondered if the allure of these parties wasn't the luxury or the celebrity, but the sense of impunity they offered, a place where the rules didn't apply. And yet, for all the chaos, it wasn't the fights or the overdoses or even the drugs that haunted Marcus the most. It was the things he saw when no one else was looking, the moments when the mask slipped and the reality of these people's lives came into focus. He spoke of a model, barely 22, sitting alone on a balcony, tears streaking her perfectly contoured face. When Marcus approached her to see if she was okay, she looked at him with empty eyes and muttered, "I don't even know who I am anymore." There were others like her, young men and women lured by the promise of fame and fortune, only to find themselves caught in a web they couldn't escape. Marcus saw them at every party, their smiles forced, their laughter hollow. They moved through the crowd like ghosts, invisible to everyone but him. "People think these parties are all about having fun," Marcus said, but a lot of the time it felt more like a feeding frenzy. Everyone was out for something: money, power, validation, and they didn't care who they had to step on to get it. As the year went on, the parties grew wilder, the stakes higher. There were rumors of secret rooms where anything went, of deals made and broken over whispered conversations, of people disappearing into the night, never to be seen again. Marcus couldn't confirm all of it, but he didn't doubt it either. He had seen too much, heard too much to believe otherwise. By December, Marcus was done. The weight of what he had witnessed was too much to bear. He quit his job and left Los Angeles, retreating to a quiet life far from the chaos of the party scene. But the nightmares followed him. He dreamed of the faces he couldn't save, the moments he couldn't forget. He dreamed of music pounding in his ears, of laughter that wasn't really laughter, of a world that seemed to be crumbling from the inside out. Looking back, Marcus didn't regret his time with Diddy's security team. It had taught him more than he ever wanted to know about human nature, about the thin line between indulgence and destruction. But it had also cost him something, a piece of himself he would never get back. "People always ask me what it was like," he said, his voice tinged with both bitterness and nostalgia. "And I tell them the same thing every time. It was everything you imagined it to be, and it was so much worse." The clock always seemed to tick slower as the night deepened, and the air grew heavier with sweat, perfume, and the tang of spilled champagne. Marcus Steele, now far removed from those infamous nights, often found himself staring at the shadows in his quiet home, thinking back to the things he could never unsee. It wasn't just the parties, it was the lives they ruined, the parts of humanity those gilded walls stripped away, revealing something primal and terrifying. The parties were more than events. They were orchestrated spectacles, each one meticulously crafted to outdo the last. Marcus learned quickly that these weren't about fun, they were about domination. For Diddy, it was never enough to just throw a good party. The goal was to create experiences that made people whisper in hushed tones for weeks afterward. But the cost of those whispers was steep, and Marcus often bore witness to that price. One night, Marcus was stationed near a grand staircase at one of Diddy's high-profile events. It was a luxurious estate, the kind of place where even the wallpaper probably cost more than Marcus's car. At the base of the staircase was an open bar that stretched the length of the room, manned by bartenders who moved with mechanical precision. By midnight, the space was overflowing with celebrities and hangers-on, their laughter rising and falling like waves in the cavernous room. At the top of the staircase stood a man Marcus didn't recognize, unusual in a crowd where almost everyone was someone. The man was tall with sharp features and a manic energy that made him stand out. He was gesturing wildly, his face flushed, his words slurred as he shouted down to the crowd below. Most people ignored him, too engrossed in their own conversations to care, but Marcus saw the signs. He'd seen them too many times before. This man was a ticking time bomb. Marcus approached the base of the staircase, his hand resting lightly on the earpiece clipped to his suit. He didn't want to escalate the situation, not yet, but he was ready to move if things got out of hand. As he got closer, he caught snippets of the man's ranting, something about betrayal, about someone owing him. Marcus's unease deepened. He signaled to one of his team members stationed nearby, a silent command to be ready. What happened next unfolded in seconds but felt like an eternity. The man suddenly lunged forward, gripping the railing as he screamed something unintelligible. Marcus didn't wait. He bolted up the stairs, his heart pounding as he closed the distance. By the time he reached the man, it was clear what he'd been trying to do. At his feet was a shattered glass, its jagged edges glinting under the chandelier's light. The man had tried to slash his wrists, and though he hadn't succeeded, the intent was unmistakable. Marcus grabbed him, pulling him away from the railing and pinning his arms to his sides. The man struggled, cursing and shouting, but Marcus held firm. He signaled again, and 2 more members of his team appeared, helping to escort the man out of sight. The guests below barely noticed. The music was too loud, the drinks too plentiful. By the time the man was in the back room, being treated by a medic Marcus had on call, the party was back to its usual rhythm. But Marcus couldn't shake the moment. He'd saved the man's life. But the question lingered. What had driven him to the edge in the first place? Later, he found out the man had been a former business associate of someone in Diddy's inner circle, someone who'd been invited to the party as a cruel joke. The man hadn't been stable to begin with, and the night pushed him over the brink. It was a lesson Marcus would never forget. These parties weren't just dangerous for those who sought them out. They were weapons, wielded with precision, capable of destroying anyone caught in their path. Another night, another nightmare. Marcus remembered a Halloween party, one of the most elaborate events he ever worked. The mansion had been transformed into a gothic dreamscape, complete with fog machines, strobe lights, and staff dressed as everything from vampires to angels. The guest list was a who's who of Hollywood and music royalty, each costume more extravagant than the last. But amidst the theatrics, Marcus found himself drawn to a peculiar figure. A woman dressed as a black widow, her gown a cascade of sequins that caught the light like 1,000 tiny mirrors. She moved through the crowd with a grace that seemed almost supernatural, her eyes scanning the room as if searching for something, or someone. Marcus's curiosity was piqued. He kept an eye on her, watching as she engaged in hushed conversations with several guests. There was something off about her demeanor, something calculated and cold. Hours later, as the party began to wind down, Marcus saw her again, this time in a heated argument with a man he recognized as a prominent producer. The man looked agitated, his face flushed as he waved his arms. The woman, by contrast, was ice calm, her expression unreadable. Marcus moved closer, positioning himself within earshot. "You promised me!" the woman hissed, her voice low but venomous. "You said it would be different this time." The producer didn't respond, his eyes darting nervously to the crowd. Before Marcus could intervene, the woman turned on her heel and disappeared into the throng. Hours later, the producer was found slumped in his car, a cocktail of drugs in his system that would land him in the hospital. Marcus would later learn that the woman had been his former protege, someone he'd exploited early in her career. The Halloween party had been her revenge, her way of confronting him on a stage he couldn't ignore. It was a reminder to Marcus of the undercurrents that ran beneath these events, the unspoken tensions and histories that could erupt at any moment. But it wasn't just the guests who posed a threat. Sometimes the danger came from within. Marcus spoke of the staff, bartenders, servers, even fellow security personnel, who were drawn into the chaos. He remembered a young bartender named Rico, a kid fresh out of college who'd taken the job to make ends meet. Rico was bright-eyed and eager, always quick with a joke, always ready to help. But the parties wore on him. Marcus watched as the kid grew quieter, his jokes fewer and far between. One night, Marcus found Rico sitting on the steps outside the venue, his head in his hands. When Marcus asked what was wrong, the kid looked up, his eyes bloodshot and his face pale. "I can't do this anymore," Rico said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's too much." Marcus tried to console him, offering words of encouragement, but he knew it was futile. The job had taken its toll. Rico quit a week later, and Marcus never saw him again. Today, Marcus lives far from the glamour of those nights, but the memories linger. They come to him in dreams and quiet moments, unbidden but unshakable. He's tried to move on, to build a life that feels real and grounded, but the shadows of those nights are always there, a reminder of a world he can't escape. Looking back, Marcus often wonders if the people who attended those parties truly understood what they were stepping into. Did they see the darkness, the danger? Or were they blinded by the lights, the music, the allure of being part of something bigger than themselves? Marcus Steele never planned on becoming the gatekeeper of one of the wildest chapters in modern party history, but life often takes people to unexpected places. His journey into the whirlwind world of Diddy's parties began as a professional challenge, a chance to prove himself in one of the most high-stakes environments imaginable. Yet, as he settled into the role, it quickly became clear that the stakes were more than just professional. They were existential. The parties weren't simply about decadence or excess. They were a theater where egos collided, secrets unraveled, and lives were often irreparably altered. In the months following his departure from Diddy's security detail, Marcus found himself reflecting not just on the events he had witnessed, but on the people behind them. It was easy to demonize the guests, to see them as reckless or shallow, but Marcus knew the truth was more complex. The parties were a symptom, not the disease. They revealed the cracks in a culture obsessed with status and spectacle, a world where the line between indulgence and addiction blurred beyond recognition. One particular memory haunted him more than most. It was a party held on a sprawling yacht off the coast of Miami. The event had been shrouded in secrecy, with invitations sent to an exclusive list of high-profile attendees. Even Marcus, who was privy to most details in advance, was given only minimal information. His job, as always, was to ensure that nothing and no one disrupted the night. The yacht was a floating palace, its decks gleaming under the soft glow of custom lighting. Guests arrived by private boats, stepping onto the vessel with the kind of casual confidence that comes from knowing they belong to an elite circle. Inside, the atmosphere was intoxicating. Live music, flowing champagne, and a sense of freedom that only comes when you're miles away from prying eyes. Marcus was stationed on the upper deck, keeping an eye on the crowd below. It was a beautiful scene, but something felt off. There was a frenetic energy in the air, a desperation that pulsed just beneath the surface. He noticed it in the way people moved, their laughter too loud, their movements too quick. It was as if everyone was trying to outrun something, perhaps their own emptiness. As the night wore on, Marcus's unease grew. He spotted a young woman leaning against the railing, her gaze fixed on the dark water below. She was striking, with an air of confidence that belied her age, but there was something in her expression that caught Marcus's attention. She looked lost. Marcus approached her cautiously, maintaining a professional demeanor. "Everything okay, miss?" he asked. She turned to him, startled, her carefully constructed mask slipping for just a moment. "I'm fine," she said, her voice steady but unconvincing. Marcus didn't press her, but he stayed close, watching as she drifted through the crowd like a ghost. Later, he saw her again, this time in one of the yacht's private rooms. She was seated on a plush sofa, surrounded by a group of men who exuded power and entitlement. One of them handed her a drink, and though she smiled, Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders. He made a note to keep an eye on the situation, but before he could intervene, he was called to another part of the yacht to deal with an unrelated issue. By the time he returned, the young woman was gone. He searched the yacht discreetly, but it was as if she had vanished. It wasn't until the next day that he learned the truth. She had left the party abruptly and was later found unconscious in a hotel room. The media would spin her story into a cautionary tale, but for Marcus, it was a stark reminder of how quickly things could spiral out of control. These incidents weren't isolated, they were part of a pattern, one Marcus saw repeated time and time again. The parties created an environment where vulnerability was exploited, where people's darkest impulses were given free rein. For every guest who left with a good story to tell, there were others who left with scars, physical, emotional, or both. One of the most chilling aspects of his job was the normalization of behavior that would have been unthinkable in any other setting. Marcus recalled a New Year's Eve party that featured a live performance by a world-famous artist. The event was breathtaking in its scale, with fireworks, dancers, and a crowd that seemed to buzz with collective anticipation. But behind the scenes, things were far less glamorous. Marcus was stationed near the green room where the artist and their entourage were preparing. As he walked past, he overheard an argument between two members of the entourage. It was heated, their voices rising above the muffled music from the main event. Marcus paused, unsure whether to intervene, but before he could make a decision, one of the men stormed out, his face twisted in anger. The remaining man, a member of the artist's management team, turned to Marcus and shrugged. "Just another night," he said, his tone flippant. That phrase stuck with Marcus. Just another night. It encapsulated the culture surrounding these events, a world where excess and dysfunction were shrugged off as routine. The people who thrived in this environment weren't necessarily the strongest or the smartest. They were the ones who could endure its relentless demands without breaking. But not everyone could endure. Marcus often thought about the staff who worked these events. The bartenders, servers, and cleaning crews who witnessed the same chaos he did, but without the safety net of a six-figure salary or a powerful network. These were the invisible people, the ones who cleaned up the messes and bore the brunt of the guests' entitlement. He remembered a cleaner named Rosa, an older woman who had been working events for decades. Rosa had a quiet dignity about her, a resilience that Marcus admired. One night, after a particularly grueling party, Marcus found her sitting on a crate in the storage area, her hands trembling as she smoked a cigarette. "It's always the same," she said, exhaling a plume of smoke. "They make the mess and we clean it up." Her words were simple, but they carried a weight that Marcus couldn't ignore. Rosa wasn't just talking about spilled drinks or broken glass. She was talking about the moral mess, the human debris left behind when the music stopped and the lights came on. As Marcus continued to work these events, he became increasingly disillusioned. He had entered the world of celebrity security with a sense of professionalism and pride, but by the end, he felt more like a janitor cleaning up after a never-ending disaster. The parties were supposed to be about celebration, about bringing people together, but in reality, they often felt like the opposite. They were isolating, dehumanizing, and at times, deeply tragic. Marcus found himself questioning his role in all of it. He wasn't just protecting the guests, he was enabling the system that allowed these events to continue. He was complicit, and that realization weighed heavily on him. When he finally left, it wasn't with a sense of triumph or closure. It was with a profound sense of loss, not just for himself, but for everyone who had been caught in the web of those nights. Marcus had entered the world of celebrity security thinking he could make a difference. But by the end, he realized that some systems were too broken to fix. Now, as he reflects on those years, Marcus carries the memories like scars. They are a reminder of a world that exists just beneath the surface of what most people see, a world where beauty and horror coexist in equal measure. And while he's grateful to have escaped, he knows he'll never truly be free of it. The parties may be over, but the echoes remain. The years Marcus spent guarding the chaotic epicenter of Diddy's legendary parties left him with an unsettling clarity about human nature, fame, and the fragility of identity. Even as he moved on, taking quiet security jobs for private families and low-profile events, he couldn't escape the shadows of his past experiences. He began to notice how those parties had distorted his perception of normality, how the extravagant and bizarre had become his baseline for what people were capable of. One memory that resurfaced often was a rare, quiet moment he had during a party in Beverly Hills. The event had taken place in a sprawling mansion with a labyrinth of interconnected rooms, each hosting a different kind of chaos. One room was filled with celebrities playing poker for obscene stakes. Another hosted a pop-up club complete with a live DJ and flashing strobe lights. Amidst all of this, Marcus found himself drawn to the back garden, where a single older man sat alone, sipping whiskey. The man, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, looked out of place among the sea of younger, flashier guests. He gestured for Marcus to sit with him, and for reasons Marcus still couldn't explain, he obliged. The man introduced himself as a retired music producer, someone who had once been a key player in the industry but had faded into obscurity over the years. "They always think the party's the reward," the man said, swirling his drink. "But it's not. It's the trap." The words stuck with Marcus. In that moment, he realized how many of the guests he had seen over the years had been chasing something. A connection, a deal, a moment of validation that would ultimately leave them emptier than before. The parties weren't celebrations. They were stages where people performed their success, often to hide the void beneath it. After leaving the security detail, Marcus began to hear about the aftermath of the lives he had briefly intersected with. He heard of a rising actress who had been a staple at the parties, her face a constant in the background of red carpet photos. She had overdosed in her penthouse apartment, her career and life cut tragically short. Another guest, a tech mogul known for his wild spending, filed for bankruptcy, his empire crumbling under the weight of mismanagement and excess. For Marcus, these stories weren't shocking, they were inevitable. But the one story that haunted him most was that of a young artist he had once escorted out of a party. The artist, barely out of his teens, had been visibly distressed, his hands shaking as he clutched a bottle of liquor. Marcus had intervened when the boy began to argue with another guest, gently but firmly guiding him outside to cool off. They sat together on the steps of the mansion, the boy pouring out his fears about being chewed up and spit out by an industry he was just beginning to understand. Marcus offered what comfort he could, but the boy's words stayed with him long after the night ended. "I thought this would be it, the dream, but it's a nightmare." Years later, Marcus would learn that the boy had disappeared from the music scene entirely, his promising career extinguished before it truly began. In his quiet moments, Marcus sometimes questioned whether he could have done more. Could he have saved anyone from the machine that consumed them? The question was both futile and unanswerable, a burden he carried alone. Still, he found solace in the life he had built for himself, a life far removed from the chaos of those nights. Though he avoided speaking publicly about his experiences, Marcus occasionally shared his stories with close friends, using them as cautionary tales about the seductive dangers of fame and excess. He had no desire to relive those nights, but he felt a responsibility to ensure that their lessons weren't forgotten. The parties may have been fleeting, but their impact lingered on those who attended, on those who worked them, and most of all, on those like Marcus, who stood at the edge of the madness and tried in vain to keep the darkness at bay. The echoes of those nights continued to haunt Marcus Steele in subtle ways. Long after he had distanced himself from the chaos of Diddy's parties, he carried with him not just memories, but a heightened awareness of how easily people could unravel when left unchecked. It wasn't the ostentatious displays of wealth or the celebrities that stuck with him. It was the quiet moments, the cracks in the facade that refused to fade. There was a night, during one of the more intimate gatherings, that often played out in his mind. The party had been held in a sleek, ultra-modern penthouse overlooking downtown Los Angeles. Unlike the larger, more boisterous events, this one was meant to be exclusive, an inner circle affair, limited to fewer than 50 guests. The atmosphere was different, quieter, sharper, almost conspiratorial. As Marcus patrolled the perimeter of the main room, he noticed an older woman sitting alone in a corner. She was elegant, dressed in a gown that whispered of old money, but there was a heaviness to her presence, a melancholy that set her apart from the rest of the crowd. She held a glass of red wine, but her hand trembled slightly as she raised it to her lips. Curious, Marcus positioned himself nearby, blending into the background as he always did. He overheard snatches of her conversation with another guest, a younger man who seemed more interested in showing off than listening. The woman spoke of her past, of her days as an actress in the golden era of Hollywood, but her tone was wistful, almost regretful. She mentioned how the industry had changed, how people now seemed to value spectacle over substance. "Do you know what I miss most?" she said, her voice low but clear. "The silence, the moments when everything stops and you can actually hear yourself think." Marcus found himself reflecting on her words long after the party ended. Silence was a luxury few in that world seemed to value, let alone seek. The endless noise, both literal and metaphorical, was a shield, a way to avoid facing the uncomfortable truths lurking beneath the surface. For many, the parties weren't just entertainment, they were an escape. He thought, too, about the dynamic between the older generation and the new wave of celebrities and influencers who now dominated the scene. The old guard, like the woman in the corner, carried with them a kind of wistful dignity, a sense of loss for a world they no longer recognized. The younger crowd, by contrast, seemed driven by an insatiable hunger for attention, their every move calculated for maximum visibility. Marcus couldn't decide which was more tragic, the longing for a past that could never be reclaimed, or the pursuit of a future that seemed increasingly hollow. In time, Marcus came to realize that the parties were a microcosm of a larger truth about the entertainment industry, and perhaps society as a whole. They revealed the ways in which people sought to fill the voids in their lives, often at great personal cost. Whether it was the young actress chasing fame, the tech mogul masking his insecurities with wealth, or the retired producer clinging to relevance, everyone was searching for something they could never quite grasp. For Marcus, the greatest revelation of all was about himself. As much as he had been a bystander to the chaos, he had also been complicit in it. By maintaining order, by ensuring the party continued uninterrupted, he had played a role in perpetuating the cycle. It was a hard truth to confront, but it was one he couldn't ignore. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on Diddy's head of security's revelations about 2020 parties? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.